All right, if I could ask you to take your seats, please. The moment we've all been waiting for. We've been talking about uh, CBP and SAT and the important role that these important agencies play in creating a competitive U.S.-Mexico border. So we're really excited to have our guest speaker here today. Whether you're in the private sector, trade organization, if you're here, if you have anything to do with the border, you care very much about your ongoing relationship with CBP. That's certainly the case for us at the Border Trade Alliance. Our relationship, our partnership, the communication is critical as CBP ensures border security and the efficient movement of people and goods across our ports of entry. We're grateful for CBP's work to reduce border wait times, which is one of the most challenges barriers to trade today, yesterday, and hopefully not tomorrow. It's my great pleasure to introduce John Wagner. He's the Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Field Operations at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He began his federal law enforcement career in 1991 when he joined the U.S. Customs Service as a customs inspector and worked at the New York, New Jersey seaport and the land border port of entry at Laredo, Texas, before being assigned to headquarters. You have a fan club here. Yes. And the mayor of Laredo, I think, just stepped out. But serving in his current role since 2014, Mr. Wagner oversees nearly 30,000 employees, including approximately 23,000 CBP officers and over 2,400 CBP agricultural specialists. An annual operating budget of $4.8 billion provides for operations at over 330 ports of entry, and many programs that support the national security, the immigration, customs, and commercial trade-related missions of CBP. In his 25 years plus of service, Mr. Wagner has been a leader in developing many successful transformative efforts for the organization, including the development of Global Entry Program and the automated passport control kiosks for international travelers. Overall, Mr. Wagner is recognized as a driving force behind many of CBP's resource-saving, time-saving initiatives, while simultaneously enhancing security operations at the ports of entry. So again, please join me in welcoming Mr. Wagner, Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner.
You don't have to say the whole title.
You've earned it.
No, it's too long.
Several.
It's not good to have a long title in Washington. But yeah, I lived and worked in Laredo from 1993 to 1999. We were talking out in the hallway that I was the Menudo champion in 1999.
Wait, can you?
We got a trophy about this big.
How do you earn that?
It's a story I can't tell up here, but maybe afterwards, because it's quite a story. But thank you for that kind intro, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone today about what we're doing in CBP. The border, the challenges today are just, like we've never seen before. We'll start with the migrant crisis. Everyone knows we're encountering record numbers like we've never seen before. Just an unprecedented flow of people coming through the border. And, it's impacting the whole country. It's impacting, everything we're trying to do. And, it's impacting both countries, really. And, we've got to figure out ways to work together to solve these. Earlier this month, the U.S. and Mexico got together, to talk about some of these challenges, and the vital importance of the teamwork between both countries. And, we've agreed to strengthen that cooperation and find better ways to, really secure the border and make the border a lot more efficient. So, but the overwhelming message, the border is open for business, and it's vital to both countries that it remains so. And it remains secure. And, our Border Patrol agents, our CBP officers, we recognize that delicate balancing act, that defines CBP's duty. Protect the border and enforce the laws while facilitating lawful trade and travel. It's a dual mission. They're not opposed. They work in conjunction with each other. To that end, we're determined to manage this border security crisis, which, it's a humanitarian crisis. As best we can while ensuring the border remains open and all of the other work we do around the country and around the world, continues to operate. So, the importance of this is really leveraging a lot of technology and a lot of cooperation. You may have heard about our unified cargo processing. This was something we built with the government of Mexico, and one-stop business environment for processing inbound and outbound cargo in truck, rail, and eventually air modes. It's an innovative concept. We work with SAT in Mexico and do joint cargo clearance and joint cargo examinations. The benefits, what we've seen, it enhances security on both sides. It's a streamlined operation. We've seen, 50% or greater reduction in wait times when we can do this. And we've seen a 99% trade compliance rate for participants in this. And, lowering the cost of business for everyone, in these operations. We started this in Laredo. Still Laredo proud after all these years. Where we launched a cargo pre-inspection pilot for southbound commercial air cargo in October 2015. We've steadily expanded this unified cargo process ever since across the southwest border. Most recently, we went to the port of Tecate, and we're doing the unified process for northbound commercial trucks since last September. So for next steps, we're meeting collectively with SAT and our colleagues in the Canada Border Services Agency and working on joint criteria for unified cargo processing in the air cargo environment. And we plan to launch this soon in Phoenix at the Mesa Gateway User Fee Airport, and we're discussing other expansion locations, primarily in Texas, to capitalize on the unified cargo processing, immediate cross-border trade benefits. So as we talk about the technology and our non-intrusive inspection systems, this is a program we've built over the years. I laugh because when I worked on the border down in Laredo, Mayor, how are you, sir? The only technology we had was a drill, right? And the trucks would drive by and we'd drill holes in them. We had a little brass mallet and we'd tap the tanks, but that's all we had then. I think we had one big X-ray machine in Otay Mesa, and then we had one in Pharr, Texas. But it took years for us to build up this capability. Now we've got hundreds of systems out there, and we've built this fleet of this non-intrusive inspection equipment, and we don't have to drill holes in things anymore. And we think about, okay, well, what's next? Where do we go with this next? And Congress was very generous to us last year. We were given over $500 million to build out, recapitalize that fleet. Some of this equipment's 15, 20, 25 years old, but we just don't want to buy the same stuff. So we challenge ourselves, what can we do next with this? And really, this has the potential to transform how we do cargo processing on the border. And if we can, our vision is really to build these drive-through systems where if a truck could drive through and we could have a high energy and a low energy system operating at the same time. So we would use low energy on the cab where the driver's in there and the high energy on the cargo. And we can centralize where these images go to, and we can have algorithms help us interpret that data. Not only could we potentially scan 100% of the trucks coming in, but we could do it really quick where the trucks might not even have to stop, or might not have to stop for very long to do that. And if you look at how we build out facilities and how we can route the trucks differently through our facility to take advantage of this, and if we can tie all this in together, and I'll talk about facial recognition a little later, but you can do facial recognition on the truck driver when they pull up, and that kicks off the transaction and the scans, and all this work can really be automated. So there's great potential there for us to completely transform again how we do those truck inspections. We're testing some of the low-energy drive-through systems right now I think in Brownsville, where we're doing empty trucks driving through and seeing how that works while we work with the vendors to build the high-energy components so we could do loaded vehicles as well. But you see it with the trains. The trains can come through slowly, and we can image and scan that train as it comes by. There's no reason we can't build a similar system for trucks. So you think about the potential of really what that brings to all of us to be able to build out those systems. So thank you to all the communities and operators that are working with us to build these out. And as we test this equipment out over this year into next year, we really look forward to doing this. And, tying it into the advances we made with RFID, I mentioned the facial recognition, the biometrics. the license plate readers. For people, we're looking at some self-reporting applications on a smartphone. It's really going to be an exciting time for us over the next couple of years as we develop new concepts and new ideas. One of the things we like to pride ourselves in CBP is, we're never satisfied with the status quo. We're coming up on our 230th year anniversary, the end of July, with the formation of the Customs Service. And, look at the iterations over the years of what we've been able to do. And we do that by the Commissioner, now Acting Secretary McAleen, once coined the phrase, we'll be relentlessly self-critical. And I hope you see us as partners in that we're always going to challenge the status quo. And we're always going to find, better ways to do things. So the facial recognition, we're doing a lot of work at the airports, doing a lot of work at the seaports. We're trying some things out in vehicle lanes and pedestrian lanes at the border. We're trying to capitalize on data we already have. If everyone already has a travel document, it means we've already got photos of people. So why not use those in a way that's really efficient for the people crossing the border? And let's figure out ways to do this as the cameras get better and better and can take a picture and just match against that travel document without us having to handle the document or read the RFID scan. And as we build out systems to do this, what does crossing that border then look like? And, should we equip officers with body-worn cameras that as they're talking to travelers or truck drivers, it automatically picks the face up and matches against the travel document, automatically runs all the queries we need to run in our systems? And how much time can that save us? How much more secure can that make us, and more accurate that can make us too? So, look for, again, a lot of exciting, developments as we do this. But, when I say we're open for business, it also means automating our processes and, how we handle routine and low-risk entries. And it frees officers and devotes more attention to high-risk cargo. More importantly, it helps all of your members, America's import and export community. We want to do business faster and, of course, more securely. ACE is a great example. Blockchain technology, how that fits in. We're going to find a way to figure that out. We look at, all the things happening in the consumer world today, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, predictive analytics, innovations on the horizon. We want to incorporate these into how the government does business too. And we want to do that in partnership with all of you. We look at also, there's still a human element of this, the staffing piece of what we do. For years, we struggled with the staffing, especially on the southwest border. We have a high turnover rate there. We struggle to hire officers timely and keep those vacant positions funded. Congress was very generous to us a couple years ago, gave us 2,000 officers in our budget, and for a couple years we could only hire 1,000 of them. I'm glad to report this year, based on work we started last year, where we hired above our attrition about 300 officers. This year we're on pace to hire 1,000 over attrition, or potentially 1,200 to 1,300 over attrition. Our normal attrition is about 700 to 800 a year nationwide. So we're looking to hire over 2,000 CBP officers this year. So by the end of this year, we should have all of those vacancies filled at our funded level for Congress for the first time in many, many years. And of course, this now frees us up to go back and ask for more and say, look, we can hire them. We've got, I don't want to say the hiring process is fixed because it still takes a long time. But there's some things we're working on doing that. But it's about focusing our recruiters around the country, building up what we call destination guides. So if we're recruiting in Chicago and we have vacancies in El Paso, we can talk to potential job applicants about the benefits of living and working in El Paso or any other station where we need to put people. But we've been out talking to a lot of the chambers of commerce. How do you sell the city to attract business? And if we could bring 100 federal employees down there, help us convince people that these are great places to live. I can tell you, I went from New York City to Laredo, and I voluntarily did that. I went on a TDY and ended up staying. And how do I take that experience and translate that into people coming out of the military or college graduates or other people interested in this work? And how do we? I can sell them on the agency. That's always easy. But how do we sell them on the work we do and go to the locations where we perform this work? And what's so great about living and working there, and convince people to do that. But we've kicked off some what we call a fast track hiring process, a little pilot we ran. And, we took a handful of applicants and, the things with HR, when you apply for a job, you go to the bottom of the pile and you got to wait 10, 12 months for your application to come to the top. So what if we pre-evaluated people and put the easy applicants on the top and gave them a priority appointment all the way through the process? How quick could we hire somebody? So we hired somebody, what normally takes 10 to 12 months now, we hired somebody in 26 days from start to finish. And the officer went to Laredo. That's where they went. So it was great. We had a motivated applicant, and we found the spot for that person within a month. And we hired about, a handful of people within 30 to 45 days. So now we take those lessons, incorporate them into the bigger hiring process. And I know if we can fix that hiring process, now also we can attract quality applicants into our workforce because they need a job and they'll want a job quickly. And, who has 12 months to wait for a job? Somebody else will scoop you up in the meantime. But, we plan to hire, we're making plans for, potentially several more thousand next year, depending, of course, how the budgets shake out and, see what our vacancy rate is at that point in time. But, our position should be filled. And, this is critically important because even, with the migration crisis and some of the challenges and struggles we've had in managing that, we've got 700 officers right now detailed from and around the country just to the Border Patrol stations. We started with a bunch from the southwest border. We saw the trucks back up and the cars back up. And then we went to the airports and seaports and started detailing people to the Border Patrol stations to help them out, in really just the care and the processing of the migrants as they go into that process and get that work done. But this is really the only way we've been able to survive because our southwest border is fairly well staffed to what we're funded for right now. And it's really, if we didn't have that at this point in time, it would be probably catastrophic on us right now if we didn't have that. So we're still pushing the hiring very strongly. We're still working on that process. We're still working on, now it becomes a training problem, right? And how do you get so many people through the academy and get them through quickly? We just jammed 3 more classes through this year. And I think we're gonna train over 2,000 new CBP officers this year, which are record-breaking numbers. In the past, we were lucky to do 700 to 1,000. So we're really pushing that hard because the people are the best part of our workforce. The technology is great, but we need the people to operate it, and we need the people to interpret it, and we need the people that interact with you to think of new things to do and come up with better ways, to do things. So, as we look at building a competitive border, it requires all of us. We have to adapt, adjust, and accommodate to change. And like I mentioned, the pace on us is always relentless. The first Customs Modernization Act passed in 1993, right? Probably a couple of generations ago. That year we witnessed a grand total of 600 websites in the whole world, right? I don't even think Amazon hadn't even sold its first book yet, right? And, at the time, the so-called MOD Act was considered radical, and it gave CBP, or Customs back then, new enforcement authorities. But it created the National Customs Automation Program, NCAP. Anybody remember that one? But like everything else, the trade's undergone a massive transformation. And, we look at the ways of doing business today, e-commerce. Look at how that's just upended how we do things, and the volume of e-packets we get in the mail, coming from China and around the world, and how do we adapt to this these new business models? We just can't sit back and say, well, no, you have to do it this way because, we've always done it that way. So, earlier this year, thanks to the input of our trade stakeholders and our partner government agencies, we unveiled a map for the road ahead, our 21st century customs framework. And there's 5 key pillars. First, we believe that ACE and our other systems function as important infrastructure. That's just as valuable as our roads and bridges. And we want to ensure a self-funding stream so that infrastructure will not fail, when our stakeholders and our partners need it most. Second is building on our commitment to one U.S. government, or one USG. CBP wants to use the data we gather through ACE more effectively. So we're looking at data sharing opportunities with our stakeholders and our partner agencies, and allowing all parties to make better informed decisions in a more timely fashion. And thirdly, we want to make sure we work with our industry partners to identify roles and responsibilities that may exist outside of current definitions. And fourth, we support intelligent enforcement, a concept of working with the stakeholders to improve risk management and impact our efforts to detect high-risk activity, deter noncompliance, and deter fraudulent behavior. And lastly, we recognize that 20th century trade processes cannot support 21st century trade, right? Many of our procedures are designed for large containerized shipments, and these kind of shipments are no longer entirely representative of how the international trade operates, so we have to figure out a way to adjust to that. We'll talk about the USMCA for a minute. A few words on that. 3 countries are reviewing it to determine what new legislation is required prior to passing it. This includes provisions that directly affect CBP and Homeland Security's operations, including, customs enforcement, trade facilitation, and immigration. And the entry of force into this would represent really a historic milestone in U.S. trade policy, as it would signify for the first time the U.S. has renegotiated and replaced an existing free trade agreement. There's large sections of the old NAFTA that remain untouched, and the agreement doesn't change the old tariff structure or the zero tariff policy on most manufacturing and agricultural goods, but it provides unique opportunities for us to enhance our trade mission. And it codifies ambitious customs enforcement and trade facilitation standards while adapting to a modern technology-driven trade landscape that didn't exist when NAFTA first started. So, just to conclude and then open it up for a couple questions if we have time. But, we don't view the shared border as a dividing line. This is really a powerful seam that it unites the two nations. We have to continue to challenge ourselves to find better ways to, make it more efficient and make it more secure. And I'm pretty confident, based on the work that we've done for, many, many, many years, that we're going to continue to challenge ourselves to find, better ways to do things. So thanks for the opportunity to be here and open up for any questions you may have for us.
Actually, I'm going to take the liberty of asking the first question, if I may.
You can't have my menudo recipe.
I still want to know how you earned the title. So you talk about the hiring and the 2,000 officers that are going through the academy this year. We're still at, we're lacking still the 700 agents that were taken from the northern border and airports and seaports. Is that the priority to replace those positions that have that are no longer there? We greatly appreciate the return of some of the agents, but we're still experiencing huge delays at many of our ports of entry, which even before the staffing issue was an issue.
Right.
How do you prioritize where they go?
The 700 are not permanent relocations. At least we hope not. When we can, if the migration crisis comes to an end or becomes more manageable, those officers will deploy back to their ports of entry. But at this point, there's no plans or indications that those are permanent reassignments. So how much longer this goes on, it's tough to predict right now. The numbers are still staggering. But as that, starts to hopefully die down, those officers will redeploy back. We're just
if it takes a year.
Yeah, that's the struggle and the challenge we've got to figure out. And the hiring, right now, most of the vacancies, there's, a couple of the large airports are struggling with vacancies. On the southwest border, we still got some work to do in Arizona and Calexico, but that's where those vacancies will go. These officers, the expectation is they will go back, though. The time frame, we're hoping it's shorter rather than longer, but that's what we've got to plan for. But it'll be a tough summer, to get through if this continues, because you just can't pull 700 officers out and deploy them to not that sort of primary mission. So
Right.
it's tough.
Yeah. And at Otay Mesa, we're still down one lane out of the
Yeah.
town.
So Otay's tough. San Ysidro is fully staffed at this point, and that helps Otay Mesa because we can move some people back and forth. But there's no way to pull 700 people off the line, so to speak, and put them to this activity. But again, this activity is also essential to what we're trying to do. We try to spread it out around the country to the best we can, so one place isn't impacted worse than others.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. All right, we have several questions. We'll start here, Jerry, real quick first, and then go to Sam.
First of all, thank you for your service. And I agree with you. I think before anyone in the CVP puts on a star, they should have served in Laredo at one time or another. But my question is, if given the environment that we're in today, if you had your choice between technology and more, lanes on ports of entry, what would you prefer in regards to the efficiency of our port of entry operations?
It's both, really. But recognizing we can't always just up and build bigger ports and more lanes. How do we maximize the infrastructure that's there today? And are we maximizing that? Is the technology such that it's not creating additional work? We're not creating additional gauntlets. Too often we throw something out and it creates another step, right? And 10 more people to run it. And we're trying to infuse that technology to make that transaction more efficient so we can get more throughput through that existing infrastructure while we also work to expand it.
All right, Sam.
Sam Vale, Border Trade Alliance Public Policy. Commissioner Wagner, we've been through a lot of the permutations that you're talking about from 1993, the modernization, the staffing. I don't see a lot of focus on binational high fiber lines going to the ports of entry. And that seems to me to be the backbone of any future one port unified cargo processing concept. And I don't see anywhere that's coming into a request or funding by CBP. We're trying to do it in small ports because we want to improve it. They can't put all the people on the internet at the same time do their work. So what about that kind of stuff?
Right. No, that's a great point too. As we roll out all this technology, and do we have the electricity to plug it in? Do we have the lines to the internet lines to make it work? And I think we've got to look at that infrastructure. But that's a great point. I don't have an answer right now, but yeah, we'll take a look at that too. But we've had that challenge in a lot of places.
Mayor Darling, if you want to.
Hi, Jim Darling from McAllen. I was wondering, when are we going to start the return to Mexico policy on the eastern side of the border?
I either discussing this pretty aggressively. I don't have a date to announce just yet, but it's being pretty aggressively pursued in the right locations and where to do that.
Are we coordinating with the authorities in the city of Reynosa for that?
We should be, yeah.
Okay.
Gustavo.
Thank you. I'm Gustavo de la Fuente with the Smart Border Coalition, San Diego, Tijuana. So you laid out a number of technologies, facial recognition and use of cell phones and such. Where do you see CBP in the next 5 years as far as implementing these things, and where are you considering across the entire southern border? What are your priorities as far as the technologies?
You'll see us start rolling some of it's being rolled out as we speak. Some of these systems, like a drive-through NII system, we have to build that. We have to design and build it and then test it. But over the next couple of years, short term, I see this stuff coming out and really starting to change the landscape of how trucks and cars and people move back and forth across the border. Then we've got to think about what should the facility look like? Which way should the trucks go? Can we actually have a truck roll through the border without stopping? There's some value in an officer talking to the driver, but if we're scanning the whole truck, do we need that? We haven't answered that question yet. But I think those are the things that we'll start to figure out as we test this and see the capabilities of it and what it does for us. But I do see dramatic change within the next 5 years. I'm pretty confident we're gonna roll out a lot of these systems, a lot of this technology, and get out of this process in the booth of typing data in or paper forms, and getting rid of a lot of that. That's really our focus, and make the precious human resource as efficient as can be, and focused on the work that we need the officers doing. Not so much doing a scripted transaction in a booth, be it a truck or a car. Where pedestrians coming in or at the airport, and we still have too much of the typing in that. I want to get rid of the keyboards, get rid of the mice, get rid of all that technology out of the border. You still get the officers with the mouse there in the primary booth clicking, and we have young adults coming out of college and they go, "What's a mouse?" Right now. So we've got to rebuild a lot of that stuff, but that work's underway. So I really think within the next 5 years, you're going to see some dramatic changes. The facial recognition, we're testing it in Arizona in a couple of the pedestrian lanes. Really spectacular results. We've got 130 something imposters in a couple of months coming through with legitimate documents, and they know the camera's there. After the first few hours, everybody knows it's there. But we'll roll that out, and pedestrians will start coming and going a lot quicker and a lot more securely to do that. We tested in the vehicle lanes down in Anzalduas, the cameras that could see inside the vehicle, and we could capture, high quality images of people in the cars. Now, how we use that and what we do with that, we've got a lot of work to do on that, and then what's the infrastructure requirement behind us? Do we have the lines to plug them in, right? Can we move pictures back and forth this quickly? But yeah, we've got a lot of teams really dedicated to and focused to do this, and we're committed to doing it. But the NII systems are really going to be a big driver of this, I think.
Chris, do you want to go next?
Thanks very much for this. It's been a fascinating conversation. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about, there's been many programs, whether it's Sentry or FAST, or there's special programs for a special segment of traffic to be moved through faster. And oftentimes, cars need to wait in a line mixed together with all the other traffic for a while before they get to that special lane and they get that special passage. So how do you think about, as you're rolling out new technologies, kind of how much of it is going to be available to everyone versus, the portion that's just a special program? And then what are you doing to incentivize having more people or more companies, more truck drivers enroll in those special programs so that we don't keep running into that challenge? Because I know the physical infrastructure is a big part of the challenge, but I think we have to be realistic that it's not always, we can't always just, build the special lanes out as far back as we need to. So what we need to do, in my opinion at least, is get more of the traffic over to that special lane, because obviously it works better. Yeah. But how are you thinking about that kind of balancing between special programs, general traffic, and figuring out how to make sure that as you're deploying new technology, it's actually improving overall throughput, not just throughput for a special segment that might get stuck somewhere else.
Right. So like with the special programs, they're special for a reason. They're not going to be for everyone, because if everybody's in it, then you're back to where you started in a way. But the people that are going to cross frequently, the trucks that are going to cross frequently, the people that are going to do business frequently, right? We've got to leverage their experience in crossing the border and build a trust component in that to segment that traffic out so we can deal with the rest. Yes, there's absolutely physical limitations, and as you go over the bridge and onto the other side, and you're into the city streets. So we need some help from the transportation authorities, the city planners, and helping us build for the future in these, and how far should those lanes extend back? And if we go out to Arizona, California, where there is no bridge, how do we manage that traffic in the city streets on either side to do that? One thing that we felt was pretty successful at San Ysidro. To get people into the Sentry lanes, we said our goal is to have a 15-minute wait or less in the Sentry lanes, and we'll open up enough lanes to try to keep to that. And then we divided the rest of the lanes by the ready lanes, so people with the RFID-enabled documents versus everybody else, and we'll keep that ready lane wait to half of what the regular lane is. And we try to manage those booths, because really just flipping a switch to convert them and changing the sign at the top, and make sure that we're keeping up with our promise that if you enroll in these special programs and jump through all those hoops, to get involved, there's a meaningful benefit for you. right? But if it takes you still an hour to get to the lane to use it, it defeats the purpose. So that's something we got to continue to work at, and really we need a lot of help from all of you on. We're not experts in the logistics of, the transportation and how many lanes, and we get into the city streets and we have no expertise in that area. So we really need all of you to help us with that, and sit down with us and talk about the ideas. What's the right way to move this type of traffic, through the border crossings back and forth? But
Thank you.
Hi, John Duncanwood, Director of the Mexico Institute. Thanks for being here. I'd like to hear your comments on the potential for expanding pre-clearance in Mexico, and also on the potential for collaboration with Mexico in Mexican ports. I think that's an area where perhaps we haven't explored enough.
sure, I mean, pre-clearance, we're around the world trying to talk to different airports about, how to expand our pre-clearance operations. We think it's a great security model. We think it's a great facilitation model. It's certainly easy on the travelers when you can, clear CBP before you depart, and to do that. But it gets into the negotiations then on, ones with the airport authority on the space within that airport, where it would operate, where the airlines are going to park, which gates would be available, how do you secure that space, and then the negotiations with the government authorities that would allow us to operate on their soil, and under what conditions, and what would we be allowed to do or not allowed to do, or what's permissible, within that defined space, that we could do that. And then the cost about, who funds the costs and how it's paid, and how do we reach agreements on that. And then for our employees, it's the privileges and immunities of working there, and their families, and the residences and where they work and go to school, and do that depending on how big the operation is. So there's a lot of work to go through to do that, but we're committed to that pre-clearance model. We think it addresses, again, a lot of, not only security and facilitation things, but also the cooperation. When we're on site with our colleagues from the other government and the stakeholders from the other government, it builds that natural cooperation, and it builds out a lot of the communication back and forth. So you think about the benefits of that brings too. So, I mean, we're committed to doing this. We're still talking to a lot of different countries, about where's the right fit to do it, and who would allow us to do it there. And then what's the impact on the U.S. airports? Are there domestic gates you can park at? Some of the airports are full, so we have to figure out where those planes could come in if they don't have to come to the customs arrival hall to do that. But, we really think it's definitely a priority for us. We're continuing just to work through a lot of those negotiations. The other question was?
It was about Mexican ports, Lázaro Cárdenas, Manzanillo, et cetera.
Yeah, I think there's potential for great cooperation there. We have CBP officers all around the world in our Container Security Initiative program. And again, being on site, working with our colleagues in the other customs agencies, that flow of communication and intelligence and expertise back and forth pays dividends for both countries. And working in partnership to look at risks that both countries are going to be concerned with. They might not always be the same, but they're always compatible, right? And the systems and the techniques, to uncover them are always compatible. So, even if you're looking at commercial violations versus narcotics versus national security criteria, there's always a path in the middle there to figure out, all right, what are the tools and techniques, that we use to identify these and do the inspections and do it in a way that's most efficient. So I think there's a great potential to expand on a lot of the work there now.
I think we had another question over there.
Hi, Commissioner. Thanks for being here. Brian Bradley with American Shipper. I was just wondering if you could talk a little about any plans to boost recruiting and retention at ports of entry in rural locations.
So one of the key things we've done in our hard-to-fill locations, some are rural, some aren't, but we've been offering hiring bonuses. We'll pay upwards of 25, sometimes 30% of the officer's first 3 years of salary to go to these locations. And that was key on how we filled a a lot of the southwest border ports. You know, we had them in California and Texas, across the border, a smattering of places along the northern border, doing it in San Francisco right now because just the cost of living there, it's tough for us to recruit people to live there. But those hiring bonuses we've put out well over 1,000 of those in the last couple of years, and we're seeing most of the officers will stay at least those 3 years to attain those bonuses to do that. And then from there, you know, we have various, we call them lateral reassignment policies, where, you know, officers have the opportunity to go to other ports of entry. They have the opportunity to transfer. They have the opportunity to swap with other officers around the country. Through pre-clearance, they have the opportunity to go overseas. They're always welcome to come to Washington and work for me. I get too many takers on that, but we try to build out that career path too. So it's not just about selling that first station that you're at. It's about what does your career look like when you come work for us, and then, you know, selling the full capabilities of the agency to, you know, these young adults that want to come work for us. And, you know, that's really proven successful to do that. You know, that's where we've seen, you know, our record numbers of hiring. We actually have enough people in the pipeline right now to hire a couple of thousand for next year. I think we actually have enough applicants right now that as they work their way through, we could hire well over 3,000 officers next year, provided we had the funding to do so and the ability to train that many. But, you know, again, those are good problems to have, but we're not slowing down on the recruiting and the, you know, the hiring incentives to do that. But part of it, like I mentioned earlier too, was, you know, packaging up about what's great about, you know, working at different places around the country. And as we recruit around the country, let's just not recruit for our local ports, but let's recruit nationwide. And then we've got to get our recruiters trained about where the vacancies are, where do we need people most? You know, what's it like to work in Otay Mesa if I'm in New York? You know, I've heard about it, but what's it really like? And we're creating, you know, guides that show the cost of living and the school options, the entertainment options, all the cultural things that are there, the housing costs, how much money you're going to make, what your overtime pay is going to be, you know, what's your retention bonus going to be, your foreign language bonus, you know, and what's your daily work life like that, so we can recruit people to all the different places where we actually need them, you know, so we can cover the entire country and get people to that. So really this targeted focused recruiting has helped us as well too. So our attrition, it's generally about 4% a year, and I mentioned earlier that's, you know, 750 to about 800 officers. Most of our attrition, more than half of it, is officers retire out of this occupation. So we don't see a lot of people quitting. We don't see a lot of people going to other agencies. You know, they're coming in, spending their career with us, and, you know, they're, because most of them are leaving through retirements or taking different jobs in the agency out of the uniform series. That's like another 20%. You know, so you look at 70% of our attrition is they're staying within CBP or retiring. So we're pretty healthy there. Now it's just about getting those initial applications through the process and fill. And you know, we're hard at work on that because we don't want to slow down any of this momentum.
We really appreciate the time you've taken. We had a very hearty discussion, allowed for many questions, so I appreciate everybody for participating, and want to reiterate again our thanks. You know, many of the conversations we've had today were focused on, from the different panelists and speakers, talking about the need for cooperation and coordination, and not just with border stakeholders, but with your counterpart in Mexico and SAT. And you guys really have done a tremendous job working with your counterpart in Mexico. We really commend you for that. It's critical for all the stakeholders involved. So again, want to applaud you for that. We look forward to the supplemental appropriations bill, which is right now going through or being considered. Many of us are pushing for that, as we need to support, you know, the needs and the current demands, that increasing demands that we have today. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us.
Great, thank you. Here's my card.
The menudo recipe. I was gonna put you on the spot and ask you, either share that recipe or who you cheer for if you're still in New York. Oh, that's
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's okay. Thanks. Had some very nice conversation with
Oh, great.
Yeah. And very human.
Yes.
I
Throughout my whole
the
tenure.
acting secretary. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, he's great too. Yeah, I'm a Mets
Thank
fan.
you.
Mets and Jets. I took the first pitch of the Mets game a couple of years ago.
Did you make it to
No, at Citi Field for the Mets. Yeah, man. I threw right from the mound. That was the hardest thing
I
I've had
just
to
do
do.
it.
Did you?
I completely missed it after because they were surprised I accepted it. They're afraid of not picking one.
Well, Algina was here this morning. You know, Al's an old friend. Another funny story. Al, we play baseball. He's my catcher. But I'm an outfielder. So I call Al. I'm throwing it to the first pitch at Citi Field. Help me. So he took me out. Stand on the mound. Throw it high.
Yes.
Throw it high, and it'll come right down and right down. Pressure. Not to bounce.
My friend started setting up pressure for people who like were called backwards.
Yes.
Like, even asked the professional.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's Tom Brady bounce it.
Yeah, so I thought,
I did it in a full uniform.
you did.
And
Oh, that's,
the NYPD cops was giving me a hard time. My guys were killing me.
yeah, because you're like, they'll teach you that.
You better not bounce it. Don't embarrass us. Even the girl from the Mets, I'm standing there waiting to go out on the field, and she's got the clipboard, and she's like, "Sure, you can take enough from the mound, sir." You know you don't have to. It's a lot harder. You know you can't bounce it. You better not pull up into the side. Yeah, it was terrifying. I'm out there on the mound, and I'm like, what they can do. Expand the technology of the city. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, all right. Yeah. Yes, I was on the Noodle Wall 1 year. Cooking or eating? Cooking. Allegedly. Go ahead.
You have a trophy to prove. Oh, yeah, how you doing?
To go to a restaurant.
It's just you and me, John.
That's fine. Yeah, let's just, let's break open the tequila early on.
That's right. It's about that time.
It's might as well make it a little discussion over tequila. Spread it around.
Hey, Mario, good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Mario, how are you, sir? Good to see you. I'm John.
I think I met you in Austin with the Secretary of State on the VTech meeting.
Okay, very good. Yes. How are you? Yeah, and Shane was telling me he used to be with Toyota.
That's right.
Yeah. Shane too. So.
I did about 13 years with Toyota, about 9 of them government relations.
Oh, very good. Very, very good. Yeah, he was telling me all about you. I didn't realize the Toyota connection. So, of course, he represents those folks. So, he represents us too. As our lobbyists too. So.
Great.
A lot of work. Yeah, it's good to see you.
All right, we're ready to go.
Oh, you're asking me if I...
Hi, John Varela.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please grab your seats. We're going to get the last panel started.
Thank you. Haven't been able to go to your events, and
I'll leave that for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
hopefully this year. Doing sir. Mario Soria. Mario, un placer. Thank you.
Oh, to our border summits?
Yeah, and when Cedillo went, I had everything ready,
Oh, yeah.
and the last moment, something came up. How do we work the...
We'll get it. We'll pop it up in just a second for you and give you a clicker.
Okay.
Yeah. Should be good to go there. All right. And where's that one? Mario Soria. Okay. thanks to the few and the proud who are here. We've got a few more in the hallway who will come in and join us, but thanks for sticking with us throughout the whole session today. We do have one more really interesting session, and for me, this is a really important one. You know, we've spoken for a lot of the day about how it is that you can move things back and forth across the border the most efficiently, the most effectively, understanding how you can do that while you balance it with some of the security challenges and migration challenges at the border. And of course, that's of fundamental importance for border communities and for the United States and Mexico and our economies as a whole. But I don't think that's enough. That's not enough for U.S. border communities. That's not enough for Mexican border communities to really have the vibrant communities that we want, the quality of life that people in the border region aspire to. We need to do more than just move widgets back and forth across the border. It requires strategies for economic development that leverage the unique position of those communities along the border as a way to attract companies to do business in the region. There is a unique value proposition there. There's the combination of the competitive advantages of Mexico and the United States side by side that makes working and producing in the border region particularly attractive and interesting. I mean, if we look back over time, and go back to, say, the Maquiladora program, the border industrialization program of the 1960s, it was the beginning of free trade between our two countries, you know, focused on the border region and on Mexican border communities in particular. And it was effective in attracting a certain amount of manufacturing investment to that part of the border, to the Mexican side of the border. It's called the twin plant model. That was the idea of the Maquiladora program, meaning that there would be a plant on the Mexican side of the border and a plant on the U.S. side of the border. Well, the Mexican side of the border, those plants appeared, but oftentimes they didn't have that twin component on the U.S. side of the border. And so that's what I mean. That was a necessary condition for economic development, but it wasn't sufficient, right? To get those investments on the U.S. side of the border, we needed people like these guys here to go out and make the case to companies that this is actually the right place to be doing the business. And then we need the set of factors that makes it, you know, really attractive for those companies to land in those regions. And so that's some of the things that I want to think through and talk to our panelists about today. But I think there's a ton in that space of what else is needed that we can think about. I mean, workforce development is more key than ever. Having the qualified, well-trained workforce to operate more sophisticated machines and more sophisticated equipment than ever is one of the things that companies are looking for. Quality of life, like John Wagner from CBP was just talking about, is what everybody needs in their local community to attract talent to fill those positions so that companies want to go and do business there. Access to energy, access to infrastructure. I mean, the list goes kind of on, and we can sort of get some prioritization as to which some of the most key elements are from those who live and work in this type of business along the U.S.-Mexico border. So I'm really thrilled to have three great panelists here with me today, and I'll go through and just do a very brief introduction of each of them. You have their bios in your packet, so you can read a bit more about them. But Federico Schaffler is the director of the Texas Center for Border Economic and Enterprise Development at Texas A&M International University in Laredo, Texas. Federico has a number of previous positions that he's held in the city government of Nuevo Laredo, in the state government of Tamaulipas at times as well. He worked as a Mexican customs broker for a long time, so a lot of different experiences that he'll be drawing upon as we have the conversation. To his left is John Barela. John is the CEO of the Borderplex Alliance, which is pretty unique in representing, and he can tell us more about it, 3 different states, New Mexico, Texas, and Chihuahua, and that tri-state area across the U.S.-Mexico border. He was also previously the Economic Development Cabinet Secretary for New Mexico and has a lot of really fascinating experience from his time there that we can draw on here as well. And then finally, last but certainly not least, is Mario Lozoya. Mario is, I'm flipping through and like missing my spot here in the, is with the Greater Brownsville Investment Corporation. Am I saying it correctly? Incentives Corporation. And is something, is the executive director and CEO of the Greater Brownsville Incentive Corporation. He's also sits on the board of directors for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, and worked in government relations and external affairs for Toyota previously in San Antonio. So Mario, thanks so much for joining us. I'll just say one sort of last thing before I jump into this. I have done a bunch of work over the years on economic development in the border region, but recently wrote a chapter for a book that's about to be published through the University of Arizona Press, and actually interviewed 2 out of 3 of these gentlemen as a part of that process. So I've had the chance to talk to Federico and to John about this topic in detail, and we'll probably try to draw out some of the points that we've talked about previously there, and actually also had the chance to work with University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, and other stakeholders in the greater Brownsville area on an economic development project over the last several years that the EDA, Department of Commerce EDA, helped fund. So I think this will be a really good chance for us to dig deep on some of these issues. But as we're getting started, I just want to give each of you guys just a couple minutes to make some opening comments about your thoughts about economic development in your particular corner of the border, and more generally about what it means to be doing economic development work in a cross-border setting and along the U.S.-Mexico border. Mario, I know you have a couple of slides just about the Brownsville region, so maybe we'll just start with those so we can get that done and then sort of jump into the more conversational piece of this program as well. Do you have a clicker? Oh, here it is. Just pass that over to Mario.
Good afternoon, everybody. What I thought I'd do is, through a small set of slides, kind of set up the condition of what we're talking about here, and then I think that'll open up some conversation. So Brownsville is at the tip of southern Texas, way down the bottom border to Matamoros, Tamaulipas. You can see where it is, and we have a port there, the Port of Brownsville. And you can see relative to San Antonio how far it is. I think a lot of people think San Antonio is South Texas. We still have about 4-hour drive left south to go, right? But here are some key numbers, and I hope that we touch on, because these numbers are not just relevant to Brownsville, they're relevant to a lot of communities in the border region. It is the largest community in the Rio Grande Valley, if you were not aware. 31% is below the poverty level. I think I have another chart that shows what does it look like compared to our neighbors. We just looked at this data. We're at 15,000 per capita, but if you look at the 2010 census, it's at about 13,000 per capita. It's literally the poorest community in the country. Okay, the household, the median income, 64% make it out of high school, and really about 14% don't make it out of 9th grade. So when you start looking at the human capital, this is the challenges that we have in the border region. And I started using this particular last number, and we saw the CBP commissioner talk about the digital divide. I think somebody in the audience asked that question about what's the connectivity in terms of broadband. 67% of the households in Brownsville are not connected. So we're talking about when you're going into a technology phase and the teacher is asking the students to do their homework or the research online and turn in the homework online, you're leaving a lot of the population behind, and it's a further struggle. That's the point that I'm trying to make here. So here's comparison to Brownsville, McAllen, Laredo. You can see that literally they're the 3 poorest MSAs in the country, and they are in your border, in the Texas border. Texas, by contrast, is like 15%. So in terms of problem solving, we really need to hit it with a lot of different prongs, a lot of different angles. Education and workforce development is literally our top item based on the condition that I just showed you, the disconnected condition, the poor condition, the education unattainment. So we feel that workforce development is key, especially when we look at high-skill, high-tech programs and the lead time to get somebody prepared to assume the jobs of tomorrow. I say it takes usually between 4 to 6 years. So we really need to start them down in the middle school and get them going. We recently launched a workforce initiative in Brownsville called We Grow Our Own, and just 2 weeks ago we were awarded the Texas Workforce Award for Texas. So we're very proud of the work that we're doing, and we want to continue that and share it across the valley as we grow. Pathways for Technology in Early College High School was a Senate bill that was passed about 2 sessions ago, Senate Bill 22. It literally, what it does is allows high school students to graduate with a 2-year degree, a technical degree. I know a lot of you maybe have children or you yourselves have gone through a dual credit program in high school, but it's in academia dual credit, not in technology dual credit. So we went to Austin and say, we need dual credit in technology so that we can get our students in that high-tech space right away, while in high school, so when they graduate, they have a technical degree and a high school diploma. There are about 15 schools that are in this space in Dallas, and there's 2 more south of Dallas, and they're in Brownsville, Texas. we're working on creating a manufacturing innovations hub. Right now it's a concept, but what we want to do is, based on what's happening in Brownsville with SpaceX, with shipbuilding, with LNGs, talking about coming into the region, we think that we need to be prepared in a larger way, not just in workforce, but also in research and development. And this research and development, or we hope to do it with a multinational university system. Monterrey Tech, University of Texas, Texas A&M, and Monterrey and Tecnológico de Matamoros, which will make it a regional concept. Texas Manufacturing Assistance Center, if you're familiar with that, it's funded through Department of Commerce, NIST, and it's a grant that's given to Texas, creates 9 partnerships in manufacturing assistance. We want it to change its scope of work or add its scope of work to include workforce development as well. And regional partnerships, we really work very hard with the Consul from Tamaulipas, with the Secretary of Economía from Tamaulipas also to help us work together. And as Chris mentioned, the twin plant system, and try to sell that system a little bit more aggressively. Recently in San Antonio, in terms of what are we doing in key innovative ways to incentivize companies, we're not incentivizing any companies unless they're providing high pay, high take jobs at a certain level of pay. We recently closed 6 deals that added 1,155 jobs at that average was $15.40 an hour, which is a lot in the Brownsville area, which creates a $42 million payroll estimate. So those are new kinds of ways in which we look at incentivizing companies to come in. And obviously the target and everything that we're doing is to try to meet these targets here together, and the thought is to share this across the valley and then across binational perspective. And that's what I have. I thought I'd put that together so we can at least understand what's the condition that we have in the border region.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Mario. And obviously the border is very diverse. There's a lot of different conditions around different parts of the border. We have some of the communities represented here. If we talked about this in sort of the San Diego context, it would be very different than in the Brownsville context. Obviously, each community has a different sort of set of challenges, but a different set of assets that they bring to the table as well. John, do you want to talk about sort of, how it is that the Borderplex works, what it is, and, anything else you want to sort of get us kicked off with?
Sure. Well, thanks, Chris, and many, many thanks for all of you for being here, for the Wilson Center hosting this, BTA, and all my friends and allies in the audience. Thank you. We've got a lot of issues to deal with and address. The Borderplex Alliance is very, very unique. To my knowledge, it's the only privately funded organization that represents the 3 states and 2 countries. We defined our region as Ciudad Juarez, El Paso County, and Doña Ana County, New Mexico, my home county. And it's a region that's comprised of about 2.5 million residents. You put it in the middle of the United States, it would rank in the top 20 MSAs in the United States. It is geographically located as far south as Brownsville is. It's as far west as you can go in Texas and still be in Texas. We're right in the middle of the NAFTA countries, east and west, and north and south. And so strategically, we like to consider ourselves the gateway of trade for the Americas, because 1/5 of the trade that is transacted between the United States and Mexico occurs through our 6 ports of entry in the region. So what's interesting is that with all the uncertainty that's currently existing in the world today, and especially with respect to our bilateral relationship with Mexico, and make no mistake that Mexico is a strategic and certainly economic ally of the United States, we know this. Despite all the uncertainty, our organization, which really has 3 functions. Number 1, to serve as the economic development agency for the region. Secondly, we act as the policy advocacy organization for the region. Third, we're now developing a strategic plan to primarily focus on workforce and policy advocacy in each of the sectors that we try to recruit to our region. But despite all the uncertainty, we are seeing record levels of interest from companies, vetted projects in our region. And we are moving up very, very quickly, especially in the manufacturing sector. We in our region are now the 4th largest manufacturing hub in North America. In the last year to 18 months, we surpassed Detroit as being the 4th largest manufacturing hub in North America. Some 300,000 high-paying jobs are created in our region. And as I always say, our region should be a model in how you create economic opportunity, how you secure the border, and how you conduct bilateral relationships in a respectful and honorable way. We certainly are very, very proud of those statistics. And just
2 days ago it was announced that El Paso has record level low unemployment levels. We are at 3.6% pre-NAFTA. It was always hovering around the 12 to 14% range. In our sister city in Ciudad Juarez, below 3% unemployment. And that, of course, is leading to wage gains in a positive note, in a very, very measured, positive way. So we're very, very happy with the development that's occurring along the border. And we're hopeful that as we deal not only with workforce issues, not only as we deal with these macro policy issues here in Washington, that we can finally reach a level of certainty. As was been mentioned, and it's a theme that I've heard from many panels today, Chris, is that certainty is very, very important for future development and economic opportunity. And I use the mantra of saying that uncertainty is the enemy of jobs, economic growth, and investment. And to maximize that potential, we all need to be working, yes, on the macro level, but those of us here on this panel need to be working very much on the local level to prepare ourselves for the jobs of the future, for a workforce that's trained and trainable, because that is now the number one issue for companies looking to expand or relocate is, do you have a trained or trainable workforce? And happy to say that I think I speak for all my colleagues here. Not only does El Paso and the Borderplex region have that, most, if not all, of the communities along the southern border offer that strategic advantage for economic development. So for companies looking to expand, relocate, keep our competitive advantage in the region, I always emphasize, yes, we do have that trained and trainable workforce, but we need to hope we get into a discussion about some of the artificial limiters or the artificial ceilings that exists and why we still have room to grow in our respective communities along the southern border. Once again, thank you for inviting me here, and it's an honor.
Thanks very much, John. Appreciate it. Federico?
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Duncan, Chris, Brett, Paola. Thank you all for being here, for this opportunity. And just a correction, I've worked with the custom brokers. I've been an advisor, and I worked with several capacity, but I am not a custom broker. And when I've seen what some of them go through because of Mexican laws, of a minuscule error that they lose their livelihood and even sometimes even their liberty, I would never want to be a custom broker. I worked with them over 16 years, both in Nuevo Laredo and Mexico City, and the last time I was over there 4 years, and I was in charge of training for custom brokers and their personnel. And I not only live at the border, but I have a very strange story, and I'm going to do it really short. And I'm going to mention it like this. I'm a Mexican who was born in Canada and now is working in the United States. And up to a year ago, I had a son working in Canada, a daughter working in the United States, and a daughter working in Mexico. So, and I go back and forth every day, so I know about the Sentry lines and all of that. Anyway, just a couple of slides so we can get into the conversation. And as you all well know,
you need to use the microphone.
Okay. Okay. As you all well know, the importance of our border ports of entry. This is just what Texas represents for world trade. 30.8% of all trade of the United States with the world crosses through Laredo. 42.9% through the Customs District of Laredo. That's the second largest in the country, behind Los Angeles. 10.7% El Paso. 30.7% Houston, Galveston, 10.1% in Dallas-Fort Worth, and 5.6% Port Arthur District. And these slides, Chris is going to have them, so if anyone wants them, you can have them. We can send them to you. All of these you already know. This one is interesting. The share of trade between Mexico and the United States since 2012 to 2018 has been growing constantly. The share that we have this last year was 36.9% through the city of Laredo. I don't know if the mayor's still here. And another 14.9% through the rest of the ports that are Del Rio, Eagle Pass, and all the way to Brownsville. So that gives us 52% of all U.S.-Mexico trade to our customs district. This part here, 12.5%, is trade through El Paso. 19.7% is trade through the other ports of entry of Arizona, California, and Nuevo Mexico, and 15.9% the rest of the ports of entry of the United States. This is U.S.-Mexico trade, $1.17 million a minute through all of these. And maybe this is interesting for some. Crime rates at our ports of entry. The United States, 394. This is FBI information out of every 100,000. Texas, 439. And down here you have Laredo, 322. You have El Paso, 379, and San Diego, 367. So at our border communities, we have the lowest crime rates of many parts. And don't get me talking about other cities like the one where we are at now. This is information just for you. If any one of you wants information, you can go to our website. And we have, for each of the 4 states, border states, we have all of the ports of entry. This is the information for the state. And then we have imports and exports for each and every one of the cities of your respective states. So this information is here, and you can download it, and it's constantly uploaded with recent data. And here are the commodities that cross through the bridge, through your ports of entry. So that's what those are the slides that I wanted to share. But so maybe we can go into the.
Great. Yeah. Why don't I keep going with you for just a second, Federico?
Uh-huh.
So when we talked during the process of creating that book chapter that I was mentioning, you talked to me about how it was that the city of Nuevo Laredo sort of came together, basically to build the World Trade Bridge. Laredo is, as you mentioned, the major, really, the number one at least hub of U.S.-Mexico trade. How is it that the city developed that skill set? Obviously, someone like you in your own career sort of represented somebody that's, teaching customs brokers how to do their job. There's a lot of skill, actually, that it takes in developing a logistics cluster that can be, world class. How is it that the city worked to build a World Trade Bridge and develop that skill set in, such a specialization in facilitating trade?
It has to do a lot with the origin, and because of its geographic location, before NAFTA, it was a very important crossing point for trade. NAFTA just blew up everything exponentially. But we also have a customs and trade and logistics community that are very, very proactive. Back in the 80s, before a lot of the things that we take for granted now in technology, Mexican custom brokers in Nuevo Laredo, who just returned after studying at MIT, a couple of them, started working on ways of using computers to facilitate transmission of data. And we're talking about floppy disks. And then they went over with the Mexican SAT, Mexican Customs, and they developed this system where everything was starting to go through computers. And even though at the beginning it was once a week when they took the disk to the bridge, and then they just downloaded everything, and then it was every day, and then eventually they got to develop it as a pilot project for all of Mexico. And that with the fact that a quarter of all Mexican custom brokers have their patente aduanera in Nuevo Laredo, and another quarter of those who have their patentes in the rest of the ports of entry of Mexico also have offices in Nuevo Laredo. And that's something we can talk about later, the economic impact of that. But the thing is that because of these individuals who live and whose parents and grandparents live because of trade, they went full ahead on doing this. But the thing that really changed everything was that they got together after a mayor, Horacio Garza, who was he was twice mayor at the beginning of the 90s and at the end of the 90s. And the city was just chaotic with the long lines of trailers that went through the middle of the city and in front of schools, and there were so many accidents. I used to go to a school and had a cross this was in the 60s, right? But anyway, and it was awful then. back at the late 80s, early 90s, it was incredible. So Horacio Garza came together with the custom brokers and the transportation guys, and they put their money where their mouth was, and they started financing the construction of the bridge because the Mexican federal government didn't do it. They do keep the revenue of the tolls, not as the case in Laredo. The Laredo, Texas budget depends a lot of that. So the thing is this, there was the political will and there was the economic vision that they had to do something to get that traffic out of the city and make it faster.
Thanks, Federico. So yeah, I mean, one lesson there is clearly it's the coming together of the private sector with the public sector to get things done, and sometimes getting things done even when the federal government isn't working so well, right? And that's, I think, a story that we hear across the border again and again is local communities figuring out ways to get things done, to move international trade, and really help out the federal government when they're experiencing challenges, experiencing problems, and facilitating that trade. That's, I think, an important lesson. John, again, 3 different states that you represent. Some things that we hear across the U.S.-Mexico border is that sometimes a local community, on the U.S. side of the border is competing with another local community on the U.S. side of the border for investments, for traffic across bridges, things like that. How is it that an organization like yours is able to overcome some of those challenges? I mean, you represent 3 different groups of people that have elected officials with different sets of constituencies, yet somehow you're able to get everyone to see the value of cooperation over the possibility of competition. How does that develop and sort of, and how do you talk to people so that they see that value of cooperation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris, and it's certainly a very relevant, germane question. And I've had the unique opportunity to see it not only serving as a public servant in New Mexico as cabinet secretary, where there is some competition. Of course, you're always trying to create jobs. That was what the taxpayers of New Mexico expected me to do, and the governor. And by the same token, we know that the region that we inhabit all rely on one another. And the bottom line is that we indeed are a bicultural community that shares the same border, the same culture, and yes, we share the same economy. And that last point is absolutely critical in overcoming some of the objections that maybe some more parochial political leaders might have about the region. To take a step back, when I did serve as cabinet secretary in New Mexico, in 2011, it was interesting to say that the state of New Hampshire did more trade with Mexico than New Mexico did, as stunning as that might sound. And we had to engage in a regional, certainly when we were talking about workforce, when we were trying to draw businesses to the Santa Teresa area, to the New Mexico side of the border, we simply had to say and share resources, because we do have universities that are almost about 40 miles apart. University of Texas, El Paso, New Mexico State. We had to tell employers that it was okay to hire graduates from UTEP, for example, and vice versa. Now that I'm in this job, we brag about the wonderful universities that we have in the region. Combined, we have more university students in the region than any Big Ten community in the United States has combined. We're graduating more engineers in our region than any Big Ten community, which has huge universities in the United States. So these are the types of things that we all brag about, that we all have to talk about. And the message has gotten out to political leaders. Certainly the business community gets it. And I'm happy to say that we're all working on a strategic plan right now that will focus on workforce development primarily, pooling the resources together. And the last thing I want to say about the issue, Chris, is that the workforce issue is very, very critical. So is local infrastructure. David Panko, who's from El Paso, works at the Free Trade Zone, who's in the audience, is emblematic of a lot of how we have to cooperate when it comes to things like transportation. Every state has to work together with, for example, the transportation infrastructure in our region, or things will come grinding to a halt. So for that, over $2 billion worth of investment on just the U.S. side of the border is occurring in New Mexico and in Texas. $2 billion. So we're keeping ahead of growth, making sure that we have this competitive flow of trade, while at the same time securing the border, frankly, and the two concepts are not mutually exclusive. So all of these things and others have contributed to overcoming the objections, and I'm happy to say that we are working very, very well together, especially in the private sector, the government sector, in talking about how we move our entire region forward, because the bottom line is that this is not a zero-sum game. I always say that job created in Ciudad Juarez ought to be a job created in the U.S. and vice versa, and that's the way we approach it.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's really interesting. Mario, when we did this study that I mentioned earlier, I mean, the way we started it was by looking at what trade was moving through the region, and then started seeing where there are opportunities to attract, suppliers, different pieces of industry that might fit into the supply chain moving through the greater Brownsville area. Can you talk a little bit about, what industries do you all target? And just talk us through a little bit, what are the conversations like when you're talking to potential investors? What are the things that they're asking you? What are the things that you're pointing out to them that really resonate the most as you try to land a company in those industries?
Right, and that's very complicated, the question, but and I think different communities across the border deal with it differently. In the Brownsville to Laredo probably region, I think years ago, especially in the times of the heavy maquila involvement or movement, till today, we didn't have a true assessment or inventory of what's the percent of types of industries in these maquilas. Are they tech? Are they automotive? Are they medical? Are they energy related? Right. So I think now that we have some manufacturing associations that are working together and sharing data on both sides of the border, us and economic development can better assess what kind of package from incentives package can be put together to entice a company, let's say a automotive company. We can now say, hey, look, we can mitigate your logistics costs because we have this percent of automotive tier 1s or tier 2s within a 50-mile radius or 40-mile radius. So we're able to now have a more detailed discussion on how we can mitigate the profitability window of these companies when we bring them in, right? Before, we were just saying it's pie in the sky. We want more jobs but not know really how to attract these companies. I think we're getting better at that as we share data across the border and across towns. But I tell you, as USMCA NAFTA 2 is coming around and hopefully gets ratified soon, there's still a lot of hesitation of investment from different companies, different countries, different regions. So we see a lot of that hesitation still today. The rules of origin is going to be an issue. Hopefully, it works on our behalf and for the betterment of the region. The tariffs, steel tariffs, and the like are also conversations when they come see us about how's that going to work, right? So, the unique condition that we have in Brownsville is that we have a port, we have Matamoros, and we have Brownsville MSA that can probably mitigate a lot of that tax and tariffs through opportunity zones and the like. But I'll tell you that recently, in the last 2 months, it was, and the gentleman here brought it up earlier, is the first question they asked was security. Some people around the world and around the other parts of the country think that it's a war zone down there in the border region, and it's not. Brownsville, for example, is the number 2 safest city in Texas. I think it's the number 13th in the country. Laredo's a very safe community. El Paso, McAllen, they're all in lists depending on what kind of websites you look at. They're essentially very safe communities, right? So that's something that we never had to entertain before as an economic development organization, right? But we do today to show them, hey, this is very safe. And then the workforce development component is very important. Some companies, I did a lot of work with Toyota, and my charge at Toyota was help us find a profitability window sooner based on workforce development strategies, right? The thinking is that if you have a strong workforce that is high tech, can build a quality product, then if your CFO and your manufacturers target so much production a day, so much production a month, so much production a year, then they should be able to make profit this much a year. Therefore, they can project I can make my money back, my investment back in 10 years, right? But when you have a weak workforce that can't problem solve problems, if I'm supposed to be making 1,000 trucks a day, but because of problems I'm only making 700, so I'm 30% out of profitability, right? So those are the kind of conversations now that we can have intellectually with data, with companies coming into our region and say, we know what to do. We have the human capital. Come to us. We're ready for business. The border is. And another point that I'd like to make is that although we see a lot of investment in the points of entry that we just saw, right? It's in my opinion, it benefits a lot of the interior United States and not the border region, because it created a pass-through region, right? I mean, it's a lot of produce coming through the port or through the point of entry, but not in that border region on both sides, right? So it's really important for us to work regionally, work together to understand these numbers better so that we can help, I guess, reflect this kind of investment in our communities.
Yeah. Federico, that was one of the things when we talked that you brought up as well, was that, you know, that was something Laredo did. I mean, that's why I started with the question, what did Laredo do right, basically? And made all these really important investments to attract trade through the community. And the community kind of lives on that trade, right? But maybe missed an opportunity to attract manufacturers and some of the others. Can you talk about that side of the equation and maybe how it is that communities, what it is that you see that was missing that didn't have Laredo develop in the same way as some other communities along the border?
Well, I mentioned a little while ago, in Mexico there are around 880 custom brokers. 220 have their license patented to work in Nuevo Laredo. That's their headquarters. Another 200 plus operate in Nuevo Laredo. So you have around 450 Mexican custom brokers, all of whom, or 99% of whom, have operations on the U.S. side, from Brownsville to San Diego. And that means that those 400 plus, just in Laredo, and let me tell you that on all the U.S.-Mexico borders, 60% of all Mexican custom brokers have their headquarters on the border cities, all the way. That is, in my, I've tried to do it, we talked of it some time ago. Could that be considered a foreign direct investment from Mexicans in the United States? Because they're creating jobs, they're paying taxes, they're building warehouses, and they have from custom brokers businesses to transportations to boutiques and restaurants. They've diversified. And what could have been done on the respect of manufacturing? A lot. The thing is that and I've mentioned it before, and I think, some people don't like it, that we take for granted that trade is always going to cross through Laredo. And we've never thought about a second economic vocation for the city. Not Nuevo Laredo and not Laredo. That's it. 90+% of the workforce is services. So that is something that we missed. 1988 in Nuevo Laredo, we had an event, was Laredo's Maquila, and we were trying to attract businesses from all around to invest in Nuevo Laredo, in maquiladoras, and most of them went to Reynosa or El Paso or Tijuana. And everyone was fine with that because trade was still number one. That was pre-NAFTA. Mm-hmm. So we could have done a lot, and I still think that that enormous volume of trade of commodities, of products that go back and forth, maybe some of it could be assembled and added value on plants on either Laredo or Nuevo Laredo, but that is something that's just maybe.
But that's one of the things we hear all the time is sort of how can communities add more value in the supply chains that they're a part of? And I think sort of related to that is, what is the unique value proposition of being a community along the border as you're going out and trying to attract business? And John, maybe you can come in on this and talk to us a bit about how you frame that value proposition of working along the border, of investing along the border. I think if I remember correctly, you talked about, some investments coming in that required a bilingual workforce, for example, or, actually moving back to creation where you do have some level of joint manufacturing happening on both sides of the border, some spillover effects from the manufacturing side of things. Mm-hmm. So talk to us about how you approach that and the special value proposition of a border community.
Well, there are countless advantages to being along the southern border with Mexico. And I think all of our communities, and especially in our region, we have one of the youngest demographics of any large MSA, metropolitan statistical area, both sides of the border. So we have, again, that trained and trainable young dynamic workforce. So we talk about that. We have strategic advantages that we offer for foreign direct investors. About 10 years ago, 15 years ago, certainly saw it in my prior job, in my prior life, that China, make no mistake, China is a trade foe. They are going through a very difficult time right now in terms of their workforce and how, really, in my humble opinion, they're becoming less and less competitive. And the trend was the reshoring of American jobs. And the question is, when you're looking at FDI, especially from Asia, I think our communities, and especially the Borderplex region, has a very, very compelling story to tell when it comes to the reshoring of these jobs from Asia. And make no mistake, that trend, I think, will continue. Why? Because in China, you have rising wages, you have a very expensive utility cost there, you have a very unpredictable political system, and finally, you see a situation where transportation costs are rising, but most of all, the quality of the Chinese products do not compare to the quality of the products that are being made in North America, both in Mexico and the United States. And for those reasons, I think you're going to see that trend continue. And we've got a wonderful story to tell, because we should be the place of choice for the reshoring of these jobs. And make no mistake, hundreds of thousands of these jobs are coming, and coming soon. Tariffs or no tariffs against the Chinese. And we need in our region to be able to tell that story and make sure that we're in the forefront of telling that story, not only in the Borderplex region, but in our sister communities up and down the border, and we're happy to do that. Last thing I'll say about it is that in order to stay competitive, we got to make sure that we're staying ahead of infrastructure. Once again, you've heard that a lot today too as a theme. And if the federal government's not going to take the lead, well, the states and the local communities need to. Just like, again, the state of Texas is doing, and the local leaders in El Paso, to make sure our road system, everything from roads and water. And by the way, I've got to compliment our water authority, the Public Service Board. What they have done in El Paso is incredible by providing and making sure that there is a sustainable and very, very viable amount of water with conservation to last for several more decades. And what they're doing there is incredible, because there is that perception too, at least in El Paso, that we don't have enough water. Yes, we do. And so we can tell all that story and do it in a forceful, compelling way. Then you know what, we win these projects more often than not. We're defeating places like Phoenix and other spots in other communities, and I love beating Phoenix. I love beating communities
There might
like
be some
Salt
people
Lake
from
City.
Phoenix there, be
Well, you
careful.
know, so be it. It's friendly competition, right? But you know, it always comes down to the same communities vying for these FDI projects. It seems, at least it's been in my experience, and so we've had some very, very good fortune in being very competitive. Last thing I'll say is proof in the pudding. We are finalists in our region for four very, very large and significant projects because we've been able to proffer all of these advantages, and we're competing with cities more inland in the United States. And so very, very, very happy to report as well. We may not win any of them, but God willing, we'll at least win one, maybe all of them.
Great, thank you. We have time for just a couple questions before we finish up here. Does anybody have one that they want to throw out there? I know I have several more. Here's one right here. Let me get you a microphone, please. And then if you could identify yourself and then ask your question. Yeah, it's okay. But if you could just wait for the microphone. And
Oh, okay.
There it is. Thanks.
He preempted me on the water, but I didn't know if there were any really specific things that you wanted to mention about how this works. I mean, you know, you have enough water, and they're doing something innovative, I assume. Or
Yeah, the water in the tri-state area is very, very, it's interesting. It's a little bit complex legally. As a recovering lawyer, I won't try to explain it, but it's made complex by Interstate Water Compact, and I'll leave it there. So we have to, first of all, comply with not only the international compacts that we have with Mexico, but we've also got to comply with interstate water compacts. That being said, what the PSB and the Public Service Board has done was not only buy additional water rights, but they've emphasized two things. Number one, it's the world's largest inland desalination plant that they have. We have almost countless amount of brackish water in the area and in the region. So that one end is technology and foresight and making sure that we have enough water rights in the region. And the second is a very aggressive water conservation effort throughout all 3 states, really. And so the combination of which has been a very powerful story to tell, and luckily we're in a situation that we're in right now because of that. Thank you.
Mario, you want to jump in?
Yeah, can I add to that point? It's not just about acquiring water, is how can communities smartly use the water, especially from an economic development perspective. I'll tell you, when I was at Toyota, we used 1.3 million gallons of water a day. You know, so a company's not going to come into your region if they don't have water for the manufacturing process, and oftentimes it's large amounts, right? So how the municipalities utilize their water, not only for their population, but also the reuse water, purple pipe, frackage, or whatever, so that they can accommodate the needs of industry for economic development.
Great, thank you. I've got another question here, and that. Maybe we can actually, if you guys don't mind, collect just a couple of questions, because then this will be the final round of answers here. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure thing. Hi, my name is Maripaz Alvarez, and I was wondering, you've been talking about investment and also the strategic plan. I was wondering if there's anywhere there about entrepreneurship or small and medium scale local businesses, and if there's any, again, program or idea on maybe having them from both of the sides work together as small and medium businesses or entrepreneurship programs, projects, things like that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Mayor?
Yeah, Mario brought up a point about the conception that we're dangerous on the border, and I've heard probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 senators and 10 or 15 congressmen this week say it's a crisis on the border. They paint this broad brush across that, and I know when they call, we explain it, but how many people don't call and make their decision based on the news, and what can we do to counter that?
Yeah. Great.
Jerry?
Let's finish it off with that. Jerry, did you want to jump into one last question?
Jerry Schwell from Laredo. I wanted to ask Mario and actually all 3 of you all, looking at understanding the challenges that we have of our youth on the border communities, we have the asset of a bicultural environment. How far back do you identify back to tap into the young men and boys and girls? At what level should we be working on to prepare them for what 25 years from now USMCA may look like?
Yeah. I actually did that study in San Antonio, coincidentally, and
I set it up for you, buddy.
I'll give you $5 later, Jerry. But I mean, I'll use the football analogy. I mean, if you have a professional quarterback and you look at the recruiting for a professional quarterback, they're probably recruited out of a lot of Tier 1 schools and maybe some Tier 2 schools. And then those schools recruit at a lot of smaller schools, and then they also those schools recruit at a lot of high schools, and those high schools kind of prepare their other smaller teams, right? So all that to get one quarterback, right? So we did the math on what does it take to get one technician to fix robots, and we need 200,000 middle school touches of people to get one technician when you start doing the math, right? So we took it down to middle school. So if we think that from an economic development perspective and capitalizing on your human capital, you need to really start investing through some sort of legislation in your communities to create programs at the middle school to prepare them for technology in high school, to get them into the job career phase right after high school. Because typically in high-tech environments, about 5 to 10% require a 4-year degree. Make no mistake about it. I mean, if everybody wants to go and get a 4-year degree, that's fine, but they're not going to get hired by industry. It's typically an 80-20 rule, they call it, where 80% require certification or high school diploma, whereas 20% typically require a 2-year degree or 4-year degree. So we think that the middle school layer, to answer your question, is the sweet spot.
Great. John?
Lightning round. Let me try to answer all 3 questions. Innovation, number 1. Fortunately, we have incubators and tech hubs that are in Ciudad Juarez, El Paso, and in Las Cruces. We're working hard to develop a seamless pipeline. especially in technology, and really giving entrepreneurs in the high-tech space every tool that they possibly can have. You know, El Paso is becoming a really, really hip place for young Hispanics. The downtown revitalization that's taking place is attracting young, especially young Hispanic millennials like none other. Cool places to go eat and have a good time, and concerts and all that. So we're starting to attract this young entrepreneurial talent, especially in the high-tech sector. One example, we got a Silicon Valley company to move to El Paso. They only expected to hire 40. Looks like they're going to move their Denver operation to El Paso because they've had success. And the retention rate's been off the charts, and so we're going to keep pushing that advantage. Second, crime. Mayor, thank you. Yes, that's exactly right. That's the artificial limiter to optimizing job growth and economic potential in our region. I probably speak for everybody here that you have to get past the misperception about our region as being a dangerous and violent and lawless frontier. It's perpetuated both in pop culture and now politics. And unfortunately, that's an additional thing we have to overcome in order to optimize job growth in the area. But once we can show the data, El Paso, second safest city, over 500,000 in the United States. That chart, second safe, over 500,000. Number one, by a fraction of a point, San Diego. Not really, they're not really on the border, close, but it's a sister city on the border. Finally, workforce. Yes, we need to continue to emphasize the workforce development, not only in the innovation and tech sector, but let's not forget about the basic sector that has sustained our area, at least in many parts of the border. That's the warehousing, transportation, logistics, and manufacturing sector, because those sectors are continuing to grow. They will continue to grow, at least in our region, and we need to make sure that we have tradespeople, that we have electricians and other folks like that, high-paying jobs, truck drivers, welders, and so we can't forget about that as far as our workforce development needs.
I would also, quick, first of all, strategic plan you mentioned, I think that is something that has to be done. Nuevo Laredo and Laredo, the Región Laredo, we worked on a long-term vision plan to 2040 like 9 years ago. And then in 2015, we did an update. Laredo did its comprehensive plan. And now the thing is to bring it together, because both plans consider a long-term vision, the developing infrastructure, developing workforce. So that is something that we should probably also all along the border do, collaborating and not so much competing with one another. The thing about the perception, you already mentioned it better. We need to provide hard, cold facts to those who need them. It's going to be practically impossible to fight media, pop culture, and politicians who have an agenda, but we need to have that information out there first and forefront. And finally, regarding the workforce, we need to prepare, I think, our students to adapt, to be flexible, to be lifelong learners. And that is something that we should also probably do, because things are changing so fast that if we don't prepare students to be have the availability and the vision to work, they're not going to do it. And finally, for the future, I'd like to give a shout out to Jerry and IBC and everyone, because we need that type of engagement and a commitment to the North American Free Trade Agreement, or USMCA, and to the development of the border, and they've done it magnificently.
I want to second that, my good friend Jerry here. I see Jerry everywhere on these road trips, and his friend Eddie. So thank you for what you do.
So
it's great.
I hope you all have enjoyed this panel and all the panels throughout the day as much as I have. This has been a fantastic day, and I really appreciate the contributions that you've all made to the conversation and our understanding of the border region. It's obviously something that we need to get out there a little bit more in Washington, but we're going to keep doing the work from here from the Wilson Center, and we're going to keep engaging all of you in that work. It's a really important thing for us. And I want to thank our sponsors one more time, IBC Bank, CT Strategies, Constellation Brands, for helping make the day possible. And then just hand things over to Britton to close it out for the day. Thanks. Just stay here for a second.
Thank you, Chris. On behalf of the Border Trade Alliance, we want to say thank you again to Duncan Wood, to Chris, and the team here at the Wilson Center Mexico Institute. It's a pleasure to always partner with you all for our 6th annual conference. I also want to thank the BTA board members for all of their support and their leadership. We had a very productive program, obviously, today, thanks to all of you. And it, as you already just mentioned, our sponsors, IBC, I'll third to say how great your leadership is and how much we appreciate Constellation Brands for helping to make our reception last night, and to Angela at the Wilson Center for your help at the reception last night, and then also to CT Strategies. We're at a critical juncture. We've been talking about it all day. We obviously all seeking the modernization of our trilateral trade agreement. We will remain focused, we will remain engaged, and hopefully get this agreement done this year. So just yesterday, the BTA board, we were on Capitol Hill, we were sharing this message, sharing much of the message that we've talked about today. So we feel like we are gaining traction, and we will get there. The BTA members and I do look forward to continuing to build on the success of NAFTA for the past 25 years, not anything negative, and ratifying the USMCA. So thank you for your leadership. Thanks for your support. Let's continue to fight the good fight and win together.